Hello, bud. What are you doing? Why are you so cute? Learning the ins and outs of nutrition is great. As a dietitian nutritionist, I personally love nutrition science. But one of the big mistakes, oh hell no, you don't. Stay away from that candle. But one of the common mistakes that I see some of my patients and clients making is ignoring some of the fundamental habits, skills, and attitudes that lead to better, more sustainable health long term. Now, you've probably heard of mindful eating before, but really don't know how to tangibly fit mindful eating into your eating routine in a truly impactful way. So in today's video, we're going to talk about 10 different strategies that you can use to implement mindful eating into your everyday life starting today. I know there's not a whole lot of information about mindful eating out there, and or it's just vague or confusing. So I hope that this video helps to add some clarity to that and helps you have a more peaceful and healthy and intentional relationship with food. And hey, if you're new, hello and welcome. My name is Katie. I'm a registered dietitian and certified personal trainer. And here on the channel, we talk about everything from hormone health to blood sugar balance to fitness and mindful and intuitive eating. So if that interests you, then definitely consider subscribing if you learned something from this video. Let's start with the cliche that everyone thinks about when they think mindful eating: slow the F down. Slowing down helps you savor the foods that you're eating, which also helps your body register hunger and fullness cues a whole lot better than if you're completely distracted. It also helps our body to digest the foods that we're eating better. Did you know that digestion of carbs and fat actually starts in the mouth and not the stomach? When we chew foods and our saliva hits the foods that we are chewing, it helps break down those foods before it even goes down our esophagus. No, this does not mean that you have to eat at a snail's pace, nor does it mean you have to count your chews like some weirdo. I'm pretty sure that that was a tip in one of my women's health magazines back in the day. Definitely some weird stuff going on back then. Some weird nutrition tips going on. But if you catch yourself rushing through a meal or a snack or eating while you're on the go constantly, assess whether or not you can take a few steps back and slow things down in the moment. It may not be practical in every situation, nor is it realistic to think that you're never ever going to eat distracted or never ever going to eat fast ever again, but try at least 50% of the time to slow things down and really savor your foods. I promise your digestion and your hunger signals will thank you. Tip number 2, and the next thing that you can do to practice mindful eating this week, is to assess your hunger signals before, during, and after your meal for at least 1 to 3 days. And I say this because it does take time to kind of assess the situation and see what kind of patterns you often fall into during the week. And also we eat differently depending on the day of the week. So how you pay attention to your hunger and fullness might be different on days that you have work versus days that you're at home versus days that you're out with your friends. So I encourage you to mix it up and try this out on different days where your routine might be a little bit different. I'll put a hunger scale up on the screen for you to check out, but essentially you're gonna rate your hunger on a scale of 1 to 10, and this is gonna help you assess how you go into meals, how you pay attention to your hunger cues during a meal, and how often you stop eating when you're actually full versus stopping maybe when you're overly full, or even stopping before you actually get satisfied from a meal. The last one can often happen when we're dieting and we're trying to kind of numb that hunger and push it down and eat less food than our body actually needs. I encourage you to keep a log of what you notice. You can keep this in a notebook or the notes section of your app, but log what happens meal to meal so you can actually go back and reflect on the patterns that you notice. We often lose sight of how hungry we actually are and go day to day on autopilot. So I have a lot of clients who say, hey, I'm not hungry until 3 p.m. That's just how I am. But more often than not, what we actually come to find out is that they're just ignoring their hunger and fullness signals until 3 o'clock because maybe they're so busy or maybe they haven't had breakfast in years. But once they actually start to reflect in and maybe have a meal or snack earlier on in the day, they start to notice, hey, I actually am hungry. earlier than 3 p.m. So try this one out, and I think you'll find some really insightful reflections. Tip number 3 to more mindful eating is to make a list of the foods that you feel guilt or shame around. Now, this one you might be wondering, okay, why the heck would I do that? And the reason is that foods that we feel guilt and shame around are often foods that we try to restrict heavily. And when we restrict foods, we actually do the opposite of what we're trying to do. We end up hyper fixating on those foods, and we may restrict in the short term, but then long term, we end up having a binge, or we end up getting in this cycle of perfect days and cheat days versus having these foods sprinkled throughout our week so we can enjoy them in moderation and in smaller portions. The first step is just making that list of foods that you feel this guilt and shame around. And if you're not quite sure what those foods are, what are foods that you find yourself justifying having? For example, oh, I'm eating this pizza, but hey, don't worry, I've eaten good all week. Or maybe it's foods that you don't have when you're around your friends, but it's foods that you'll have in private when the doors are shut. That's a sign that you feel some sort of guilt externally or internally that you've probably internalized from external things in your past. That's a sign where you're feeling guilt or shame around those foods. And this is important for our next tip, tip number 4, which is slowly integrate those foods back into your diet in a mindful way. And this is called food habituation, if you've heard of it in mindful eating, which essentially means that you are habituating yourself to that food that you once restricted so it no longer bothers you in the same way or leads to the same feelings of guilt and shame as it once did. In a way that I recommend reincorporating these trigger foods in a safe and smart way is to incorporate them after a meal. So for example, if you are afraid of cheesecake is one of my favorite dessert foods, but it has sugar and it's higher in fat. So it was one of those foods that I really had a lot of guilt and shame around for a long time, and kind of made sure that I didn't have it or had it in a super small portion if I did have it. But one way that I started to reintegrate this back into my diet is having it without restriction, but after I had a full meal with carbs, fat, and protein. So a really well-rounded meal with proteins, veggies, and carbs. And then afterwards, having that snack. So naturally my body would need a little bit less of a portion, but it got used to tasting and reincorporating that food into my diet without feeling so out of control. If you've had any past history of disordered eating, I encourage you to do this with the assistance of a registered dietitian. Don't do this on your own. This can lead to more cycles of guilt and shame, which can potentially lead to and trigger more disordered eating behaviors. So you definitely don't want to do it unassisted if you have that in your past. But if you are just a former dieter and maybe you want to have less of a restrictive mindset, this can be a simple and easy way to reincorporate some of the foods that you love but feel fear around. Let me know if you want to learn more on this topic. It could definitely be a whole topic on its own. Tip number 5 is to incorporate a mini meditation before you have your meal or your snack. This is probably more realistic to do before dinner, so I would just choose it before one of your main bigger meals of the day, whichever that is for you. I actually have a hunger check-in meditation on this channel, so I will link it in the description below. But even if you do a meditation on your own where you're just closing your eyes for 1 to 5 minutes and checking in with your hunger and fullness levels, saying, okay, how hungry am I right now on a scale of 1 to 10? Is it physical hunger? Is it emotional hunger? Am I bored? What is going on in my mind? And this is not a way to push out hunger. This is not a way to deny yourself of hunger or to say everything is emotional eating. I think that's a common mistake that I often find people doing, is thinking that boredom eating means that they shouldn't eat. But sometimes you can feel both boredom and hunger at the same time. So don't mistake this for saying, okay, I'm not going to eat if I'm bored, or I'm not going to eat if I'm sad. You still need to eat, even if you have emotions there. It's just those moments where maybe you only feel the emotion and you're not hungry whatsoever, that you should find a way to address those emotions without using food. Sometimes tricky to figure out, I know, but definitely talk with your dietitian or therapist about this if you're having any trouble. The next tip I have for you, tip number 6, is one that you should use if you ever feel ravenous. So if you come home and you are about to eat the fridge itself, then stop and do this tip first. And this tip is simple but so helpful, and that is have a piece of fruit when you are feeling ravenous and then choose your next meal. So again, simple but effective. And the reason this works, especially for those of us who experience low blood sugar or hypoglycemia, I know I am one of those people, and anyone with blood sugar issues may have the same experience as well. I need to have that blood sugar back up again before I can make any sound decisions. No good decisions were made when you are level 10 hungry. Another mistake that I see with this is picking something like a protein shake or something low carb when you are already low blood sugar because you think that that's a more sound decision. And what you really need to do again is bring up your blood sugar because it's already low. Protein and fat take a lot longer to process in the body for energy than carbs do. So getting that quick boost is important, again, for your cognition and for your energy. So next time you come home famished and you're ready to just have whatever in the fridge to bring that blood sugar back up, try having a piece of fruit first so you can get that quick energy so you can make a smart decision. Tip number 7 is to eat every 3 to 4 hours. Now, this might sound counterintuitive because we're talking about eating mindfully and kind of like intuitively, and then we're also telling you a specific rule around how often to eat. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? But part of mindful eating, at least in my definition of mindful eating, is being in touch with your body. And you cannot be in touch with your body and its hunger and fullness signals if you are going large periods of time without eating anything. Just like I mentioned earlier with those people who think they're not morning eaters, but it's really because their body is so adjusted to not eating that they think they're not morning eaters. This is also true. If you haphazardly eat food throughout the day and never really have any consistent schedule, your body is gonna adjust to that and it's gonna stop giving you the regular signals that it wants to give you. It might not know when your next meal is, so it's gonna avoid making you excessively hungry for fear that you have to survive longer without the next meal, thus leading to an endless cycle of mindless eating. So eating every 3 to 4 hours helps to mitigate this and keep our metabolism and hunger signals regular so we can eat moderate amounts of food versus have maybe 1 or 2 really large meals a day where we eat whatever and don't really pay any mind to our nutritional balance. Tip number 8, and I am calling myself out here, is don't eat out of the Tupperware. Eat off of a plate. You want to actually enjoy your meal and have it as aesthetically pleasing as possible, and that's just not going to happen in a Tupperware container. The reason I'm guilty of this now is because I barely have time to eat because I have a newborn at home and it's very difficult to make time to do the simple things in life. Love him to death. He is my little angel, but it's true. Now, this may affect some people more than others. I know my fiance Glenn claims that he doesn't care what a meal looks like. It's just how it tastes. I am completely opposite. I feel like if something looks aesthetically pleasing, then it for some reason helps the enjoyment out of that food and it helps make it taste better. Not to say like, you know, if something tastes totally bland and it looks good, that it's good, but I think you know what I mean. Think about if you had the exact same meal and it looked like cafeteria or jail food versus a meal that looked like an Instagram-worthy picture. I think that we would probably venture to say that everyone would pick the Instagram-worthy food, right? Example number 2, think about when you've made a smoothie at home and it was poop green versus when it was that vibrant, beautiful green, or that vibrant red or purple, or some beautiful color. Which one are you gonna prefer looking at?
It's just facts. The poop green one might taste good, but it's just not that good of an experience to eat or drink something that looks gross. Eating out of Tupperware is a little less extreme than that example, but you get what I'm saying. It takes away from the experience of the food just a little bit, so you're less appreciative of it and less, fulfilled by that experience with the food. I know that's, we're talking like really deeply about our experience with food, but it matters. So take this into account when you are pulling those leftovers from the fridge, or when you're making that smoothie, or when you're presenting the food on your plate. Make it a little more aesthetically pleasing, and maybe you will find that you enjoy that meal even better, and maybe you'll find that you eat a little bit less if recently you've just been eating more portions than normal just because you're bored eating.
And poof, here we are 3 days later because Leo had a complete meltdown at the end of my video. So outfit change, and we are going to finish up with the last 2 tips for how to incorporate mindful eating into your life. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video so far, and if you have, make sure to hit the like button and check out the description below after this video, because I have a full masterclass where you can dive even deeper into mindful eating with me for 45 minutes, and I think you're gonna love the class, so make sure to check it out if you enjoy this video. Tip number 9 is to give yourself self-compassion on your off days. Every single one of us has off days. Even myself as a dietitian who has a bachelor's degree, master's degree, and a jillion different certifications in nutrition and fitness, I am not perfect with my nutrition, with my mindful eating, or with my fitness. Not to say it doesn't matter to me or that I don't really honor and care about my health, but all of that to say, it is normal to be imperfect. Nutrition and fitness and health is not just about what we know, it's also about how we apply our knowledge to our day-to-day lives. And the best thing that we can do for ourselves is stay consistent with our habits, not to be perfect, if that makes sense. When we try to be perfect, we often throw ourselves off and end up not sustaining what we actually want to do at all, which it's an all or nothing black and white mindset, versus if we focus on consistency and picking ourselves up where we left off, if we were imperfect, we're more likely to sustain our healthy habits for a lifetime versus just for a month or a couple of months where we go all in and then fall off when we're not perfect or when we have one off day or off week. And listen, we're all a little bit different, so what may trigger me or make me feel bad and want to give up may be totally different from you or your neighbor. So make sure that you identify where you have these black and white mindsets, where you have these trigger moments where you might be tempted to just completely quit. Journal on it, think on it, write it in the notes app of your phone. And I also like an app called Sanvello, which helps you kind of break down negative thought traps and reframe them. Pick up on what negative thought traps you get stuck in and make sure that you have a reframe ready so that when it comes up, you can pick yourself up and be like, hey, I know that this is a negative thought. This is an all or nothing mindset for me, and I can't let this destroy all the progress that I've made so far. Remember that a huge component that we forget about in mindful eating is the non-judgmental attitude. I think that we think about distraction-free eating and eating in the moment and enjoying the flavors of foods. But a big component that we often fail at, or at least I have in the past, and I know many of my clients have, is the non-judgment piece. This impacts our health journey a lot more than we give credit to. So make sure that you're pointing out and identifying when you have these moments and finding the reframe. If you want to talk more about reframing, let me know in the comments below, and maybe we can do a future video on this topic where we can kind of do a chit chat and talk through some mental reframes to help yourself have a more positive relationship with food. And tip number 10, your final tip today for a more mindful eating experience with food, is to incorporate mindfulness into your everyday life and really solidify your mindfulness practice beyond just food. So it sounds really obvious, but it's going to be really challenging for us to be mindful with food if we're not practicing mindfulness elsewhere. A couple examples of this can be incorporating a regular yoga practice, maybe incorporating mindful meditations into a couple days out of the week. And like we said in the previous tip, practicing mental reframes and mental shifts when we have negative thought traps. When we're more used to practicing non-judgment and mental reframes in other aspects of our life, like maybe work or childcare, or your anxiety journey. I know for me, mental reframes were really important in my anxiety and panic attack recovery. That's somewhere where I really had to practice mindfulness first and foremost, and kind of how I got into mindful eating for food as well, because oftentimes when we have anxiety elsewhere, we have anxiety and kind of an anxious relationship with food. So kind of makes sense to make that connection there. But make this a part of your regular routine so you are building the foundation of mindfulness in the background, and then when you practice mindful eating, it's just kind of building upon what you already have learned in other areas of your life. So mindful eating obviously relates solely to food, but mindfulness is such a bigger concept than just our relationship with food. It's our relationship with our mind and our body, and it can also be our experience with food too. So think of it in a broader scope, and I think you'll find that your mindful eating is a lot more solidified and a lot more strong when you practice it at other times of the week. Let me know which tips resonated with you the most today and which ones you're going to put to practice this week. I challenge you to try 1 or 2 of these tips at a time so you can really get down the habit and build upon as you go. Remember, you don't have to be perfect, and if you want to learn more about mindful eating, then check out my masterclass in the description below. I'll leave it right at the top so it's easy to click on and sign up for. And thanks so much for watching this video and hanging out with me today. It really helps me when you share what kind of questions you have, so make sure to also let me know in the comments below what questions you have about nutrition, mindful eating, fitness, and what things you want to see on the channel in a future video. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And if you want to continue hanging out with me on the channel, then I will leave a video right here that you can click through, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.